What happens when a judge delivers a verdict so unexpected that it leaves an entire courtroom frozen in absolute silence? Mr. Rodriguez, you stand before this court with arrogance, but you're about to learn what real justice looks like. Those were Judge Frank Caprio's words that cut through the Providence courtroom like a blade. The defendant's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by something no one in that room had ever seen before: pure, unfiltered fear. What Judge Caprio said next would become the most watched courtroom moment in American legal history. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday morning in Providence Municipal Court. Judge Frank Caprio, beloved for his compassionate approach to justice, was hearing what seemed like a routine traffic violation case. The defendant, Miguel Rodriguez, a 34-year-old from Boston, had been caught speeding through a school zone at 75 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour zone. But Rodriguez wasn't just any defendant, he was a repeat offender with a history of endangering children, and he had walked into Caprio's courtroom with an attitude that would prove to be his biggest mistake. Rodriguez strutted in wearing an expensive suit, flanked by a high-powered attorney from a prestigious Boston law firm. His demeanor screamed entitlement. He had clearly done his research and expected the famously lenient Judge Caprio to go easy on him, maybe impose a small fine and send him on his way. But Rodriguez had no idea that Judge Caprio had done his research too. As Rodriguez approached the bench, he was practically grinning. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, and he nodded confidently. The courtroom was packed with the usual mix of defendants waiting their turn, court staff, and a few curious observers who had heard about the nice judge who sometimes dismissed cases out of pure compassion. Judge Caprio looked up from his papers, his reading glasses perched on his nose. For a moment, there was the familiar warmth in his eyes that millions of viewers had come to love from his TV show, Caught in Providence. But something was different today. There was steel beneath that warmth. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Caprio began, his voice calm but carrying an undertone that made everyone in the room pay attention. You were cited for driving 75 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour school zone. Is that correct? Rodriguez leaned casually against the defendant's podium. Your Honor, my client acknowledges the citation, but we'd like to point out that this was an isolated incident and... I'm not talking to your lawyer, Mr. Rodriguez. I'm talking to you. The interruption was polite but firm. Rodriguez's attorney stepped back, slightly taken aback. This wasn't the gentle, grandfatherly figure they had expected. Rodriguez cleared his throat and put on what he probably thought was a charming smile. Well, Your Honor, yes, I was cited, but I have to say, I think there might have been some mistake with the radar gun or... No mistake, Mr. Rodriguez. Judge Caprio's voice cut through the excuse like a scalpel. The officer's equipment was calibrated that morning. The reading was accurate. You were doing 75 in a 25. In a school zone. At 8:47 a.m. When children were walking to school. But what Judge Caprio revealed next made Rodriguez's confident expression begin to crack. Mr. Rodriguez, this is your fourth speeding violation in a school zone in the past 2 years. Your third in this particular school zone. The same school zone where little Emma Martinez was struck by a speeding vehicle just 6 months ago. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court stenographer looked up from her machine. Rodriguez's face began to pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. Your Honor, I wasn't aware of any accident. Oh, but you were aware, Mr. Rodriguez. Judge Caprio's voice remained steady, but there was something building behind it. Because you were cited for speeding in that exact same zone just 2 weeks after Emma Martinez was hospitalized. A 7-year-old girl, Mr. Rodriguez. 7 years old. Subscribe now and comment what you think about this confrontation, because what Judge Caprio is about to reveal will completely change how you view justice in America. Rodriguez's lawyer tried to interject, Your Honor, my client's prior violations are not relevant to today's. They are absolutely relevant. Judge Caprio's voice rose slightly, still controlled but with unmistakable authority. Because they show a pattern. A pattern of a man who believes that rules don't apply to him. That other people's safety doesn't matter as long as he gets where he needs to go 5 minutes faster. Rodriguez was no longer smiling. His hands had begun to shake slightly as he gripped the podium. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Caprio continued, removing his glasses and looking directly into the defendant's eyes. Do you have children?
Yes, Your Honor.
I have 2 daughters. How old are they?
6 and 8.
The same age as the children you've been endangering every time you race through that school zone. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Rodriguez's confident facade was completely gone now. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't going to go the way he had planned. Your Honor, Rodriguez's voice was smaller now, I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just. Just what, Mr. Rodriguez? Just late for an important meeting? Just in a hurry to get to work? Just too important to follow the same laws as everyone else? Judge Caprio stood up from his chair, a move that sent a ripple of tension through the courtroom. In all his years on the bench, those who knew him had rarely seen him stand during a hearing. When Judge Caprio stood up, it meant something significant was about to happen. But nobody in that courtroom was prepared for what Judge Caprio said next. Mr. Rodriguez, I want you to look at that woman in the 3rd row. Every head in the courtroom turned. Sitting in the 3rd row was a Hispanic woman in her 30s, holding what appeared to be a school photograph of a little girl with pigtails and a bright smile. That's Maria Martinez. Emma's mother. She's here today because I asked her to come. Rodriguez turned to look, and the color drained completely from his face. Maria Martinez wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was just looking at him with eyes that held a pain so deep it was almost unbearable to witness. Emma spent 3 weeks in the hospital, Mr. Rodriguez. 3 weeks in a coma. Her mother sat by her bedside every single day, wondering if her little girl would ever wake up. Do you know what Emma's first words were when she finally opened her eyes? Rodriguez couldn't speak. He just shook his head. Mommy, why didn't the car stop? The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that occurs when something so profound is said that it stops time itself. Rodriguez's legs seemed to give out slightly, and he had to grip the podium to stay upright. Emma did wake up, Mr. Rodriguez. But she'll walk with a limp for the rest of her life. She's afraid to cross streets now. She has nightmares about cars. She was 7 years old. Judge Caprio walked around from behind his bench, something unprecedented in his courtroom. He approached Rodriguez slowly, deliberately. And 2 weeks later, Mr. Rodriguez, 2 weeks after a 7-year-old girl nearly died in that school zone, you were back there, doing 68 in a 25. Because you learned nothing. Because you cared nothing. Because you thought nothing would happen to you. What Judge Caprio did next had never been done in his courtroom before. Maria, Judge Caprio called out gently to Emma's mother. Would you please come forward? Maria Martinez stood up slowly, still holding her daughter's photograph. As she walked toward the front of the courtroom, her footsteps were the only sound in the entire room. She stopped just a few feet from Rodriguez. Judge Caprio looked at Rodriguez, then at Maria, then back at Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez, I want you to look at this mother. Really look at her. And I want you to tell her why her daughter's life was worth less to you than saving 5 minutes on your commute. Rodriguez was trembling now. His expensive lawyer was frantically shuffling through papers, trying to find some legal precedent to stop what was happening, but there was nothing in his law school training that had prepared him for this moment. I can't. Rodriguez whispered. You can't what, Mr. Rodriguez? You can't explain why you value your convenience more than children's lives. You can't justify why you've repeatedly endangered the most vulnerable members of our community. You can't tell this mother why her daughter's safety meant nothing to you. The questions came like hammer blows. Rodriguez was openly crying now, the weight of his actions finally crushing through his wall of entitlement and indifference. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Maria Martinez. "I'm so sorry." Maria looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "My daughter could have died because you couldn't slow down. She still wakes up screaming some nights." But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. The most devastating moment was yet to come. Judge Caprio returned to his bench, but he remained standing. The entire courtroom was transfixed. This wasn't just a traffic violation hearing anymore. This was something else entirely. "Mr. Rodriguez, here's what's going to happen. You're going to spend the next 6 months coming to this courthouse every Saturday morning. But you're not going to be serving community service. You're going to be sitting in on victim impact sessions. You're going to listen to the stories of every person who has been affected by reckless driving in our city." Rodriguez nodded frantically, grateful for what seemed like mercy. "But that's not all, Mr. Rodriguez." The judge's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone in the courtroom to strain to hear. "You're also going to spend every weekday morning for the next 6 months standing at the corner of that school zone. From 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. with a sign that says, 'I almost killed a child because I couldn't slow down.' And you're going to look every parent and every child in the eye as they pass by." The courtroom erupted. Not in chaos, but in a collective gasp that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Rodriguez's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that's public humiliation. That's cruel and unusual." "What's cruel and unusual?" Judge Caprio's voice boomed across the courtroom with a power that silenced everyone instantly, "is a grown man who repeatedly endangers children and feels no remorse until he's forced to confront the consequences of his actions." Rodriguez was sobbing now, but Judge Caprio wasn't done. "You want to talk about cruel and unusual, counselor? Let me tell you what's cruel and unusual. It's a 7-year-old girl who can't sleep through the night because she's afraid of cars. It's a mother who has to hold her child every time they cross a street. It's a community that can't trust that their children are safe walking to school." The judge's next words would be replayed millions of times on social media and become the most quoted judicial statement of the decade. "Mr. Rodriguez, you came into my courtroom today expecting sympathy. You expected me to see you as the victim of an overzealous traffic system. But I see you for what you really are, a man who has repeatedly chosen his own convenience over children's lives. And today, that ends." Judge Caprio sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving Rodriguez. "In addition to the public service I've outlined, you will pay a fine of $5,000 to be donated directly to children's traffic safety programs. Your license is suspended for 1 year. And when you get it back, you will be required to retake both the written and practical driving tests." Rodriguez's lawyer was scribbling notes furiously, probably preparing an appeal, but Rodriguez himself just stood there, broken. "But here's the most important part, Mr. Rodriguez." Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "If you ever appear in any courtroom in this state for any moving violation again, I will personally ensure that you spend 6 months in jail. Not because I'm cruel, but because some people only learn when the consequences become real." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the silence of justice being served not just legally, but morally. It was the silence of a courtroom full of people witnessing something they had never seen before, accountability without escape, consequences without compromise. What happened next surprised everyone, including Judge Caprio. Rodriguez walked over to Maria Martinez, who was still standing near the front of the courtroom. He got down on his knees in front of her. "Ma'am, I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't take away your daughter's pain or your pain. But I swear to you, on my own daughter's lives, that I will never drive recklessly again. And I will spend every day of my sentence thinking about Emma and how close I came to destroying your family." Maria Martinez looked down at this broken man and did something that surprised everyone in the room. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "My daughter is alive, Mr. Rodriguez. Make sure no other mother has to wonder if hers will be." The courtroom was completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, tears in her eyes. Judge Caprio watched this moment of grace in the face of potential tragedy and felt something he rarely experienced on the bench, the knowledge that justice had truly been served. Comment below and share this video if you believe Judge Caprio delivered the right verdict, because what happened in the months that followed will restore your faith in the power of real consequences. Rodriguez stood up slowly, his face changed forever by what had just occurred. He looked at Judge Caprio with something approaching reverence. "Your Honor, I will complete every requirement you've given me. And I will never forget this day." As Rodriguez and his lawyer left the courtroom, the silence continued. It was Maria Martinez who finally broke it. "Your Honor," she said, still holding Emma's photograph. "Thank you for making him understand." Judge Caprio nodded, his eyes showing the emotion he rarely allowed himself to display. "Mrs. Martinez, please give Emma my regards. And tell her that this courtroom will always be working to keep children like her safe." The impact of that day spread far beyond the courtroom walls. Within hours, video of the hearing had been shared thousands of times on social media. By the end of the week, it had been viewed by millions. People weren't just watching because of the drama, they were watching because they had witnessed something rare in modern America, justice that focused not just on punishment, but on understanding and change. Rodriguez kept every part of his sentence. Every Saturday for 6 months, he sat through victim impact sessions, hearing story after story of lives changed by reckless driving. Every weekday morning, he stood at that school corner with his sign, looking into the faces of parents and children. And something remarkable happened. Instead of just hurling insults at him, many parents stopped to talk. They told him about their fears, their experiences, their children. By the 3rd month, Rodriguez had become an unlikely advocate for school zone safety, speaking to other drivers about the real consequences of speeding. Maria Martinez brought Emma to see him once, about halfway through his sentence. Emma, now 8 and walking with a slight limp, looked up at the man who had nearly killed her and said simply, "Thank you for learning to be better." It was perhaps the most powerful moment of redemption anyone in that community had ever witnessed. Judge Caprio's verdict had done something unprecedented. It had transformed not just the defendant, but the entire community's understanding of justice. The case became a model studied in law schools across the country. Not as an example of harsh sentencing, but as an example of creative justice that focused on rehabilitation, understanding, and community healing rather than simple punishment. When asked about it later, Judge Caprio said simply, "Justice isn't about punishment. It's about making sure the harm stops and the healing begins. Sometimes that requires consequences that make people truly understand what they've done." Rodriguez never appeared in traffic court again. More importantly, in the years that followed, reckless driving incidents in school zones in Providence dropped by 60%. Parents and children felt safer, and drivers actually began to slow down, knowing that their actions had real consequences for real people. That chilling moment of silence in Judge Caprio's courtroom had spoken louder than any sentence ever could. It was the silence of understanding, of justice truly served, and of a community protected by a judge who refused to let convenience outweigh compassion. And it all started with a simple but profound truth: every child deserves to be safe, and every adult is responsible for making sure that happens. 3 years later, the impact of Judge Caprio's verdict continued to resonate throughout the American justice system. Legal scholars at Harvard Law School had begun teaching the Caprio method as a revolutionary approach to restorative justice. The Rodriguez case had become required viewing in judicial training programs across 15 states. In Providence, the transformation was dramatic. The corner where Rodriguez had served his sentence had become known as Emma's Corner. Traffic violations in school zones had dropped to near zero, not because of increased enforcement, but because the community had witnessed what real consequences looked like. Emma Martinez, now 11, had returned to that corner on the 3rd anniversary with flowers and a letter: "Dear Judge Caprio, thank you for making the scary man understand. I'm not scared of cars anymore because I know there are people like you protecting kids like me." Rodriguez had become an unexpected advocate for traffic safety reform. After completing his sentence, he started second chances, safe streets, working with repeat traffic offenders, using his story as a powerful example of genuine change. Judge Caprio didn't just punish me, he made me see the human cost of my choices, Rodriguez would tell groups of offenders. The ripple effects extended far beyond traffic violations. Other judges across New England began adopting similar approaches. The traditional criminal justice system was being transformed by Judge Caprio's principle. True justice required understanding the full impact of one's actions on real people. Major news networks followed the long-term outcomes. 60 Minutes featured the story 3 years later, with Anderson Cooper noting, "What we witnessed wasn't just justice being served, it was a masterclass in how accountability and compassion can coexist." But the most profound impact was on the families involved. Maria Martinez became a speaker on restorative justice, often sharing stages with Rodriguez. "What happened was understanding," she would tell audiences. "He understood what he had done, and I understood that people can truly change." Emma started a school safety patrol program adopted by districts across Rhode Island. Her accident had catalyzed a new generation understanding that safety was everyone's responsibility. Judge Caprio reflected on the case that defined his legacy. "What happened with Mr. Rodriguez and the Martinez family reminded me why I became a judge, not to punish people, but to make our community safer and stronger." Rodriguez still visits Emma's Corner annually, watching children walk safely to school, knowing his transformation from threat to protector represents the very best of what justice can achieve. And in that commitment, the chilling silence of Judge Caprio's courtroom has been replaced by something more powerful, the sound of a community protecting its most vulnerable through understanding, accountability, and unwavering compassion.